Me, Frank Rausen Pereira. Portuguese president is in India on a 4-day visit, and he met with the Prime Minister of India earlier in the day, and he also concluded a meeting with the President of India. Several agreements were signed between leaders of both the states, and there has been a range of areas where agreements have been signed between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Portuguese President Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa, and they also held extensive talks. The pacts provide for cooperation in areas of investment, transport, ports, culture, and industrial and intellectual property rights. Portugal is an important country for India in southern Europe, and bilateral ties have witnessed a steady progress in the last 15 years. In October 2005, Portugal extradited Abu Salem and Monica Bedi to face terror charges. Prime Minister Modi visited Portugal in June 2017, during which 11 agreements were signed, covering a large number of areas including space, avoidance of double taxation, nanotechnology, biotechnology, and higher education. Mr. Sousa arrived here on Thursday night on a 4-day visit, his first to India. The last visit by a Portuguese president to India was way back in 2007. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the bilateral relationship between India and Portugal. Joining me on the program today are Jitendranath Mishra, former ambassador to Portugal; Sheetal Sharma of JNU, Center for European Studies, joins us on the program. Pramit Pal Chaudhary, Foreign Affairs Editor of the Hindustan Times, is also with us. And Rajendra Harshe, Foreign Affairs expert, here with us this evening as well. All right, welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining me on The Big Picture this evening. Ambassador, let me start the program with you. Since you are in the thick of things and you witnessed everything happening in front of you, let's hear it from you. What are the real takeaways as far as the meetings between Prime Minister Modi and the visiting dignitary, as well as President Ramnath Kovind and the visiting dignitary?
Well, I think the main takeaway is the fact that there is continuity, and it's become a more predictable relationship. There were ups and downs in the past. We know the reasons. Now, what is astonishing for me, I'm told that 32 agreements will be signed. 7 agreements were signed today. More will be signed. And astonishingly again, 16 agreements are going to be signed in Goa. And there will be a business summit in Mumbai also. Now, what's going to happen in Goa is something very, very, I would say revolutionary. Not evolutionary, but revolutionary, because Goa has been a sore spot in the relationship in the past, as we all know. It has been a hindrance because of historical reasons, but I think the relationship is much more comfortable, much more pragmatic, much more give and take, much more predictable, and that's what we diplomats love to see. We want substance.
Okay, all right. Pramit, let me come across to you now. See, the ambassador is talking about how there has been historical baggage as far as this relationship is concerned, but in the last decade or so, in the recent past, we've seen an upsurge really as far as the ties between India and Portugal are concerned. What's the reason behind that?
I think a number of reasons. One is India's interest in developing a post-Brexit European policy. We've been noticing Britain slowly disconnecting itself from Europe, but the European Union is important to us, and so you've seen Modi visit a large number of European countries, much more so than most previous prime ministers did, including a Nordic summit. He's visited Spain, Italy, France, Germany, maybe visiting Central Europe at some point. But we've also not neglected smaller countries, and this includes Portugal. And we may point out that Portugal will hold the European Union presidency next year. So it will be a country that will be packing much more than its actual size in terms of its influence in Brussels. Second, Portugal is actually a remarkably politically stable country in Europe. Right now, very few European states, even especially the largest ones, actually have very clear political structures. Germany, for example, we have no idea who's going to replace Angela Merkel. France seems to be in a state of semi-civil war, and so on. Portugal, we've actually seen the Socialist Party of Prime Minister Costa come back to power with a stable majority. The economy of Portugal is actually doing much better than the rest of Europe at a time when Europe is teetering on recession or looking at 0% growth. Portugal is getting over 2% growth a year. So you have here a country that by European standards is both doing well economically and is politically stable. So it's a position, as the ambassador mentioned, in a position for us to actually carry out some at least medium to long-term relationship building.
Okay.
Finally, I'd just add, and it's a broader stretch, is that the so-called Lusophonian countries, Portuguese countries as a whole, you're seeing India actually, to some degree, independently developing a stronger relationship with them. Mozambique, for example, is now the largest recipient of Indian FDI and one of our biggest energy is emerging as one of our biggest energy partners in Africa. Angola, the second largest oil exporter in Africa, traditionally very close to China, under its new president has been reaching out to India and expressing an interest in closer relationships. And we've just seen the president of Brazil, Bolsonaro, become our Republic Day guest. And that's part of a larger sort of Latin American, but also reach out to middle powers like Brazil. So to some degree, you could almost say Portugal fits in very nicely into this set of relationships.
Okay, all right. So since we're here then, Sheetal Sharma, let me bring you to the picture. So in a post-Brexit era, how important is it for India to engage with the rest of Europe and, more likely with countries like Portugal, whose economy is doing far better than some of the others in the EU?
There are a couple of dimensions to it, Frank. Number one is that the India-EU statistics is certainly going to get changed after Brexit, because much of the business, trade, diaspora, tourism is related to UK. So when Brexit happens and UK moves out, the statistics is going to change. Number two, it is in the interest of both the European rest of the 27 member states as a multilateral organization and India to engage with each other without UK. Number three is that why Portugal particularly, why it is a happening economy, if you say that. Number one is that there is a shift in the focus of Indian foreign policy as well. It's not just now within the broad frameworks of alignment, non-alignment era, those days are gone. Now there is a focus on even the smaller countries, smaller in size, smaller in population, yet having one vote in the UN Security Council. We have to see that how many countries are there which are supporting our causes and which are recognizing with, and there is a convergence of ideas and similar interest and value system. Now, what has happened in Portugal case that it is one of the PIGS countries. If you remember, during 2007 and 8 recession, it went down, and then when it exited from IMF and EU framework, it bounced back. And that is why it has posted a very positive response about its economy, its growth and development, and it offers opportunity for India also to invest. The reason being that 75% of their economy is based on the service sector. Around 2% is on agriculture, fisheries and all those things. But 75% service sector scope gives India a lot of leverage to enter into that market and cash upon the kind of expertise that we have in the field of IT in the service sectors. And being part of almost 8 to 9 countries world over, particularly in Latin America, they have Portuguese as their official language. So can we see Portugal playing an important role in bridging the relationship between these countries as well? Once again, the shift in the focus on smaller country also is going to yield better dividends for us, because it's not just the case that we tend to look into the science and technology, defense, energy areas. There are a number of things which these smaller countries can also offer to us as a best practice model which we can learn from there. And energy sector is one such area where we have great scope for associating with Portugal, because one of the prime things is that renewable energy. Portugal has so much of sun, and in a couple of months they do very good in terms of using renewable energy, not going back to the conventional energy forms. So there lies a scope for us to cultivate those kind of areas which are fitting within the framework of the flagship programs of the current government.
Sure.
So that is why we can look in a positive direction together.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm going to go back to a point, Professor Rashid, that Pramit was making about the EU presidency, and how much of an impact and how much of a factor that is going to be?
I'll tell you now, I have heard other panelists, and let me put entire Portugal in politics of world perspective. My first point is, Portugal has always been important to United States of America because of its strategic location at the Iberian Peninsula, Azores Island, Madeira Island, and strategic location. Also the Rock of Gibraltar. Similarly, Portugal is important in European politics, and it has done good presidency earlier, and it has also been instrumental in organizing India-Europe summits, which are important. Now, what happens is India surely requires an advocate in Europe, and apart from France somewhere and Germany, Portugal can become advocate, although as you were arguing that perhaps economy was not doing as well as it ought to, still Portugal can be a stable partner in this part of Africa, part of Europe. Another thing that I thought was, coming back to one point which was made very interestingly about Africa, that Portugal doesn't mean just Europe, but Portugal means erstwhile empire. And Angola, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau in Africa, Macau in China, Goa in India, and Brazil, they all form the part of so-called Lusophone. And Lusophone area we cannot ignore. Somewhere Portuguese language, Portuguese culture, Portuguese people, they become an asset in terms of negotiating our strategies in Mozambique, Angola, which is rich in oil resources, and also other parts of the world like Brazil. Another thing that Portugal has is it's a medium range economy, and somewhere it has Indian population which has done well. The Goan had become prime minister once, Costa, and somewhere like Kantilal Jamnadas, a Gujarati trader, he has the largest baking firm in Portuguese Africa. So we have also possibility of diaspora, which is over 70,000 in Portugal, and then there are complementary of interest in several areas that can be negotiated through, whether it's renewable energy, whether it's agriculture, whether it's pharmaceutical, whether it's industrial technology, sewage, water, environment related areas, climate change related areas. I think there is a lot of possibility where these countries can coordinate. 11 agreements, as you have said, already were signed, and these agreements, as they get signed, much more can be achieved by, I feel. And somewhere, as a first point that I made, that India needs advocate in Europe apart from France and Germany.
Sure.
And that's the kind of central point. And Portugal is a right candidate. And now this relationship is growing steadily. Trade also has grown steadily between the two parts.
Right.
So it is a kind of right strategy.
Okay. Let's take the discussion forward now. The professor was talking about possibilities. What is the scope of the relationship, Ambassador? What are the opportunities and what are some of the challenges?
Well, the challenges stem from history. Let me go back to history a little bit and then we'll talk about opportunities. Goa became a kind of albatross around the neck. We had diplomatic relations in the 1950s and we tried to negotiate an honorable way for the Portuguese way out from Goa. It didn't happen. They were inflexible. Between 1961 and 1974, when the treaty was signed, the Friendship Treaty, that period is a kind of a dark age, if I may say so. We know very little about what happened. Were there any back channel contacts? I'm not sure. I'm going to research it in my book because it's a very interesting phase that nobody wants to talk about. But I suspect something was happening even then, some kind of contact. Now then, of course, with the change in the political dispensation in Portugal, things change. But what is happening now is very significant because when I was the ambassador, the Portuguese find Goa very comfortable. If they want to do business in India, they'd like to start from Goa. I used to tell them, please, India is not Goa. Goa is India, but India is much bigger than Goa. Go to Mumbai, go to Hyderabad, go even to Delhi. But if you start from Goa, you are starting from a very small base. Now that thinking has changed. That is revolutionary. This summit is going to happen in Mumbai, and that's broadly accepted. Now there were protests in India when Vasco da Gama's landing in Kozhikode, 500 years, the 500th anniversary was to be celebrated. There were protests. Even when Prime Minister Costa came in 2017, January, even at the fag end of the visit in Goa, there was a demand for an apology. Now we are signing 16 agreements in Goa. See the symbolism. Not just the symbolism, but the substance. We Indians are less prickly, much more comfortable about dealing with Portugal in Goa, doing political agreements, doing photo ops, doing symbolic things. So Goa becomes very important, but Goa is a bridge. Goa is never going to be a destination. It's too small in the Indian context. This is, I think, something the Portuguese understand. Two very senior ministers, whom I shall not name here, very distinguished political figures in Portugal. One of them said that we have to look beyond Goa, and the other said that we had a small problem from history, but we can talk about it like friends and we can deal with it. So that's the takeaway from the past. As far as the present is concerned, the Portuguese were always daunted by the Indian market. That's why they thought Goa is comfortable. It's small and it's familiar. Now they are not daunted anymore. They are much more adventurous. Look at Visapera, my friend Joao Castro. We started the major agreement on fiber optic cables with the Birla Group, MP Birla Group. I facilitated that when I was the ambassador. It was tough. Now, once they're in the Indian market, it's one of the most distinguished companies of Portugal, multinationals, and they are looking at India. They've never been to Goa, really. They don't do any business in Goa. They do it in Orissa, in Jammu and Kashmir and other places. So this is the takeaway, and what you're seeing is a manifestation at the political level of these changes in perception, in change to a much more pragmatic, business-like, predictable relationship. Astonishing. 4 visits since 2017. 2 by the Portuguese Prime Minister, 1 by the Indian Prime Minister, and now by the President. And I hope very much it's going to be sustainable.
Okay, all right, all right. You know, Pramit, let's talk about another aspect now, because a lot of stress and emphasis on this visit has been laid on science and technology, biotechnology and nanotechnology and so on and so forth. So, you know, we've seen in the past that several countries have been reluctant or hesitant to share cutting-edge technology with India or any of the other countries. How open do you think Portugal is going to be to share some of this cutting-edge technology?
Well, actually, we have found that a lot of the smaller European countries have actually been more amenable to working with India, especially with Indian companies, on the technology front. So you saw the Prime Minister go to the Nordic states, and obviously countries like Sweden and Finland are well known for their technology capacity. Ireland is a country we have a long software and pharma relationship. And I can see Portugal, as has been mentioned, there are areas in the biological sciences and biotechnology and in renewable energy where they are agreeable, where they have some capacities. In addition, it's important to realize that India doesn't always need the most advanced technologies. They're often very expensive. The IPR requirements are tight. And as you mentioned, the larger countries tend to be much more possessive about these. But if you're a smaller company and you see the possibility of being able to expand or multiply your smaller IPR capacity in a market as big as India, or work in conjunction with an Indian company, it's often worth it for you to be a lot more generous on the IPR. i.e., the Indian company gives me market share and gives me a distribution structure, and in return I compensate by giving some more of the IPR, and the deal works out more nicely for a lot of these countries. Another country we work very closely with, for example, that's also very small, is Israel. But it's a technological powerhouse, and we use it in defense, water, and so on, despite its small size. So it's an important. So we're now looking at a lot of these smaller countries as being an area for India to get some technological leverage in a way that we didn't before.
Right.
And the political activity of building the political bridge is in many ways a first step to giving confidence for both companies in both countries to start working with each other, and I presume that's one of the ideas that we are hoping to see develop between India and Portugal.
Okay, all right, Sheetal. So, are there any areas of the bilateral relationship that need special attention, do you think?
Yes, in fact, all the areas we have been talking about trade and technology, but look at the quantum of the business that's happening. It's not even as impressive as it could have been. So far the potential of exploiting the trade relations or bilateral relations is underutilized. What we have to see, not just science, technology, but other areas as well. Because as Ambassador was mentioning about, the comfort zone lies in Goa because of cultural affinity and the long historical connect they have. Similarly, we have with UK. Why there is so much of diaspora there? Why is there so much of business there? Sometimes people say that UK is window for India for other European countries. So we have to invest into something, not just the concrete areas and thinking about science, energy, technology only, but people to people contact as well. And this would happen only if in case we are able to focus upon areas which connects youth or higher education or exchanges. Although of course the population is too small as compared to India, it's hardly 1 crore, 1.03 crores, something like that. So how do you see that, where do we make our place in the minds of people in Portugal? Because historical, whatever has happened, Britain happens to occupy much more our colonial memory rather than Portuguese in Goa. So those are the things which are not going to be much discussed as far as the relationship is concerned. But we have to find windows where we can actually think of qualitative and substantive results coming out rather than something which happens at a superficial level and at a diplomatic level. So educational exchange programs. There have been good investment stories about number of people into hospitality industry opening their restaurants, hotel chains and all these things. It's a tourism dominated country. Much of the revenue comes from tourism. At the same time, we have a capacity to also invest into those areas where they can also harness some of the benefits that our investment can make there. Right now, the trade comes almost 80th in the rank with India, and it's hovering around 924 million US dollar only. Right. And in fact, from 2008, there was a sharp dip in the statistics, almost minus 15, minus 16% for continuous 3-4 years. And then it bounced back because of the recovery of the economy later on. So we have to see that how do we benefit from the growth rate that Portugal has registered, at the same time not just having a kind of export relationship, because it's an export oriented economy. We don't just keep on importing things from there, but to become a part of a qualitative standard part of their economy. Sure. And service sector as well.
Okay, all right, Professor Harsha, the history that we share has been a challenge, is what the panelists have suggested. But could it also be an opportunity? And also, let's not forget, the Prime Minister of Portugal is of Indian origin.
That's
so
right.
Does that also play a big role or a factor? Is that a factor?
Yeah, surely. One thing I thought, I would just make one point before I forget it, because earlier it was made by one of the panelists. I think as far as technology is concerned, perhaps Indians are not as innovative as we ought to be, because we spend less on R&D, but we are good at adapting technology. By adapting Western technology, we have resold them in several African countries. So that is India's net capacity and asset. Portugal is too small a country to give us India something substantial in terms of technology. That's what is my belief. Another thing that I feel India needs to do before I get to part of history is that somewhere FICCI and CII are already in, and they are also part of the deals now. And if you recall, India grew very important player since last decade in Africa, because FICCI, CII and all other Indian companies began to go into Africa and venture there. Area was very large, and so trade increased, so were investments, so was business possibilities. And Indians by and large are good at business and also trade. How that gets worked out is one sure area one has to understand. As far as your part of history is concerned, I'll tell you what, till 1950, it was all wonderful. Till India started claiming that Goa is part of India. Goa, Diu, Daman. And as this started, somewhere Goa liberation struggle began. Portuguese felt that we annexed that part of the country. They never accepted it. They went up till United Kingdom to see that it is raised elsewhere. Brazil also they appealed and raised, that issue was raised everywhere, but still India's occupation was firm and India's sovereignty was firm. Now, as the ambassador was arguing, Goa is important land, perhaps they are nostalgic about it, but they have to stir into Mumbai, stir into Delhi, Calcutta, because India is too huge a market, too large a market. And for India, it's necessary to group up so many smaller countries of European Union, because Europe is on your side. Suppose India makes a plea to kind of get into United Nations Security Council.
Right.
Another important point which was not made earlier, which I want to make it emphatically, that Portugal and India both have been consistently opposing radicalization and terror.
Right.
And this opposition to terror is a very major common point, and India needs the Portugal in this context, and also entire Europe. India needs. Already India-Europe dialogues have kind of brought it on the agenda, on the table. So opposing terrorism is very important as far as India is concerned, because India is facing threat around itself all along.
Right.
And that's where Portugal can come, and also possible membership of Security Council if you want to democratize the functioning of the United Nations.
Okay.
These are important points, I feel.
Okay, all right. Quick closing comments now from all my guests. I've got 2 minutes left on the program, so I'm going to ask you to be very brief. What's the best way forward, and how do we take the relationship up a notch and to the next level, starting first with you, Ambassador?
The best way forward is to be completely pragmatic about the relationship and forget about the ideological and historical baggage from history, and take small steps. We have to remember in India that Portugal is not a huge market for us.
Right.
And Portuguese also are always reminded about the size of India. So these are going to be challenges. The psychological and the conceptual breakthrough has happened. Now the real breakthrough on the ground has to happen.
Sure.
Now you mentioned about the diaspora. What I want to emphasize is that the Prime Minister, who never spoke about his Indian origins when he was the mayor of Lisbon, absolutely never. After he got elected, he was waving his PIO card in the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas summit when he was there. He's very comfortable with that. And of course, this also fits very well into our strategy, our government strategy of leveraging the diaspora for the development of India.
Right,
so
sure.
that's the way forward.
Okay, all right. Pramit, quick closing comment?
Yeah, I'm just saying that the trade and investment relationship is what needs to be built up because we need a stronger economic thing. And I'd also incorporate tourism. Indians are now increasingly major travelers overseas. And Portugal, I think, is actually is a underreported tourist destination that Indians should consider. And once that starts to take off, I think a lot of other things will automatically come into play.
Okay, all right. Sheetal?
It's not just pragmatic, we have to be strategic as well, because we have to see that how many, not just big friends we have smaller number of people, those who align with our interest, not just interest in trade, but in terms of geopolitics, in terms of the way China is moving into the smaller parts of the Latin American, African areas. So we have to move strategically in order to counter that also.
Right.
And forthcoming with smaller nations so that it gives them confidence with Indian economy, with Indian society. At the same time, we have large number of people with converging interests.
Absolutely. And Professor Harshay, close the show for us with your concluding
I
remarks.
feel that one has to kind of go back to archive, bring back some of those facts which bind Portugal and India in so many ways, revive Portuguese language and culture here in somewhere and understand them further, and let's see India centers operate in Portugal, and then kind of work out our geostrategic interest as well as general pragmatic interest in world politics to kind of see how we can complement each other in several domains.
Right.
So cooperation grows.
Okay, all right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining